The sons of Jacob at war with the sons of Esau. On the third day a great army gathered together, consisting of the inhabitants of Seir and the children of the east, and they marched down into Egypt with the purpose of making war on Joseph and his brothers. In the battle that came off, this army was almost totally destroyed. Not less than 600,000 men were mowed down by Joseph and his warriors, and the small remnant fled. Returned to their own country after this fatal campaign, the sons of Esau and the sons of Seir fell to quarreling among themselves, and the sons of Seir demanded that their former allies leave the place, because it was they that had brought misfortune on the country. The sons of Esau then dispatched a messenger in secret to their friend Agnias, king of Africa, begging his aid against the sons of Seir. He granted their request and sent them troops consisting of foot soldiers and mounted men. The sons of Seir, on their part, also sought allies, and they secured the help of the children of the east and of the Midianites, who put warriors at their disposal. In the encounters that ensued between the hostile forces, the sons of Esau were defeated again, partly on account of treachery among their own men, for their men sometimes deserted to the enemy while the battle was on. At last, however, in the battle that took place in the desert of Paran, the sons of Esau gained a decisive victory. They massacred all the warriors of the sons of Seir, and the Midianites and the children of the east were put to flight. Then the sons of Esau returned to Seir, and they slew all the inhabitants of the place, men, women, and children, sparing only 50 lads and maidens. The former they used as slaves, and the latter they took to wife. They also enriched themselves with the spoils, seizing all the possessions of the sons of Seir, and the whole land was divided among the 5 sons of Esau. Now these descendants of Esau determined to put a king over themselves, but in consequence of the treachery committed during the war, there prevailed such hatred and bitterness among them that they decided never to appoint a ruler from their own people. Their choice fell on Bela, the son of Beor, one of the warriors sent to them by King Agnias. His equal could not be found among the troops for bravery, wisdom, and handsome appearance. They set the royal crown on his head, built a palace for him, and gave him gifts of silver, gold, and gems, until he lived in great opulence. He reigned happily for 30 years, and met his death in a war against Joseph and his brothers. This war came about because the sons of Esau could not banish from their memory the disgrace of the defeat inflicted upon them by Joseph and his people. Having enlisted the aid of Agnias and of the Ishmaelites and other nations of the east, they set forth on a second campaign against Egypt, in the hope of delivering Zepho and his followers from the hands of Joseph. In spite of their enormous host, they had no less than 800,000 men of infantry and cavalry. They were defeated at Ramses by Joseph and his brothers, and their little company of 600 men. Besides their king Bela, they left 1/4 of their army on the field. The loss of their king discouraged them grievously, and they took to flight, hard pressed by Joseph, who cut down many of the fugitives. When he returned from the battle, Joseph ordered manacles and fetters to be put on Zepho and his followers, and their captivity was made more bitter than it had been before. The sons of Esau then appointed Jobab of Bozrah to succeed their dead king Bela. His reign lasted 10 years, but they desisted from all further attempts at waging war against the sons of Jacob. Their last experience with them had been too painful, but the hatred they cherished against them was all the fiercer, and their hatred never abated. Their third king was Husham, and he ruled over them for 20 years. During his reign, Zepho succeeded in making good his escape from Egypt. He was received kindly by Agnias, king of Africa, and appointed commander-in-chief of his troops. He used every means of persuasion to induce his sovereign lord to enter into a war with Egypt, but in vain, for Agnias was too well acquainted with the strength and heroism of the sons of Jacob. For many years he resisted Zepho's arguments and blandishments. Indeed, as it was, Agnias had his hands full with other warlike enterprises. It had happened about this time that a man of the land of Kittim, Uzi by name, whose countrymen venerated him as a god, died in the city of Posimana, and he left behind a fair and clever daughter, Yaniah. Agnias heard of Yaniah's beauty and wisdom, and he sued for her hand, and his request was granted him by the people of Kittim. The messengers of Agnias were returning from Kittim, bearing to their master the promise of the inhabitants that Yaniah should become his wife, when Turnus, king of Benevento, arrived on the same errand. His suit was rejected, for the people of Kittim were afraid to break the promise given to Agnias. In his anger, Turnus went to Sardina to make war on King Lucus, a brother of Agnias, intending to deal with the latter as soon as the other was rendered harmless. Hearing of the design hatched by Turnus, Agnias hastened to Sardina to the assistance of his brother, and a battle took place in the valley of Campania. Against Turnus were arrayed Agnias, his brother Lucus, and the son of the latter, Niblos, whom his father had appointed commander-in-chief of the Sardinian troops. In the first encounter, Turnus was the victor, and the Sardinians lost their general Niblos. But in the second engagement, the army of Turnus was routed completely, and he himself was left dead on the field. His army fled, pursued closely by Agnias as far as the crossroad between Rome and Albano. Niblos' body was put inside a golden statue, and his father erected a high tower over his grave, and another over the grave of Turnus, and these two buildings, connected by marble pavement, stand opposite to each other, on the crossroad at which Agnias left off from following after the fugitive army. The king of Africa went on to the city of Benevento, but he took no harsh measures against it and its inhabitants, because it belonged to the land of Kittim at the time. Thenceforth, however, bands of soldiers from Africa made incursions, now and again, into the land of Kittim, under the lead of Zepho, the captain of the African army. Agnias, meantime, went to Posimana to solemnize his marriage with Yaniah, and he returned with her to his capital in Africa. Zepho, king of Kittim. All this time Zepho did not leave off urging Agnias to invade Egypt, and he succeeded finally in persuading the king to consider his wish, and a great army was equipped against Egypt and the sons of Jacob. Among the shield-bearers was Balaam, the 15-year-old son of Beor, a wise youth and adept in magic, and the king told him to acquaint himself with the issue of the war on which they were entering. Balaam took wax and molded the figures of men to represent the army of Agnias and the army of the Egyptians, and he plunged them into magic water and let them swim, and it appeared that the African army was subdued by the Egyptians. Agnias accordingly gave up the campaign, and Zepho, seeing that his sovereign could not be persuaded into war with the sons of Jacob, fled the country and went to Kittim. The people of Kittim received him with great honors, and they offered him much money to stay with them and conduct their wars. It happened once that Zepho was in the mountains of Coptizia, where the inhabitants of Kittim had taken refuge before the troops of the African king, that he had to go on a search for an ox that had strayed away, and he discovered a cave the opening of which was barred by a great stone. He shattered the stone in pieces, and entering the cave he saw an animal formed like a man above and a he-goat below, and he killed the strange beast, which was in the very act of devouring his lost ox. This caused great rejoicing among the people of Kittim, for the monster had long been doing havoc among their cattle, and in gratitude they set aside one day of the year, which they called by Zepho's name, in honor of their liberator, and all the people brought him presents and offered sacrifices to him. At this time it came to pass that Yaniah, the wife of King Agnias, fell into a grievous sickness, and the physicians ascribed her illness to the climate and to the water of Africa, to which she, a native of the land of Kittim, could not get accustomed, because she had been in the habit of using the water of the river Forma, which her forefathers had drawn to her house through a conduit. Agnias sent to the land of Kittim and had some of the water of the Forma brought to Africa. Finding it much cleaner than the water of his own country, he built a huge canal from the land of Kittim to Africa, and the queen henceforth had all the formal water she needed. Besides, he took earth and stone from Kittim and built a palace for Uniah, and she recovered from her illness. Meanwhile, Zepho had won a decisive victory over the African troops that had made an incursion into the land of Kittim, and the people chose him as king. His first undertaking was a campaign against the sons of Tubal and the islands of the sea, and again he was successful, and he subdued them completely. On his return, the people built a great palace for Zepho, and they renewed his kingship, and he continued until his death to reign as king of Kittim and of Italy. During the first 13 years of his reign, the Africans made no attempt to disturb the peace of Kittim, but then they invaded the land, only to be severely repulsed by Zepho, who pursued the troops up to the very borders of Africa. And Agnias the king was in such consternation that he did not venture to make reprisals for some time. When he finally made a second attempt, his troops were annihilated by Zepho down to the very last man. Now Agnias, in despair, assembled all the inhabitants of Africa, as numerous as the sand on the seashore, and united his great host with the army of his brother Lucus, and thus he made his third attempt on Zepho and the people of the land of Kittim. Alarmed, Zepho wrote to his brothers in Seir and entreated their king Hadad to send him aid. But the people of Seir had concluded an alliance with Agnias as far back as under the first king Bela, and they refused Zepho's request. So the king of Kittim had to face the host of 800,000 men mustered by Agnias with his little band of 3,000. Then the people of Kittim spoke to their king Zepho, saying, "Pray for us to the God of your ancestors. It is possible he may deliver us from the hand of Agnias and his army, for we have heard that he is a great God, and he delivers all that trust in him." Zepho prayed to the Lord, saying, "O Lord, God of Abraham and Isaac my fathers, this day may it be made known that you are a true God, and all the gods of the nations are vain and useless. Remember now this day your covenant with Abraham, our father, which our ancestors related to us, and do graciously with me for the sake of Abraham and Isaac, and save me and the sons of Kittim from the hand of the king of Africa, who has come against us." God heard Zepho's prayer, and in the first day's battle 1/2 of the African army fell. Agnias then dispatched a decree to his country, ordering, on penalty of death and confiscation of property, that all the males of the land, including boys that had passed their 10th year, were to join the army and fight against the people of Kittim. In spite of all these new troops, 300,000 strong, Agnias was beaten again by Zepho in the second battle. The African general, Sophopater, having fallen slain, the troops broke into flight. At their head, Agnias with Lucus his brother, and Asdrubal the son of Agnias. After this dire defeat, the Africans made no further attempt to disturb the peace of Kittim, and their incursions ceased forever. In spite of the great victory that Zepho had won with the help of God, the king of Kittim walked in the idolatrous ways of the people whom he ruled, and in the ways of the sons of Esau, for, as says the Proverbs of the ancients, "Out of the wicked comes forth wickedness," and Zepho was no different than the rest of the sons of Esau. The severe defeat inflicted on Agnias drove Balaam from Africa to Kittim, and he was received with great honors by Zepho, who welcomed him on account of his deep wisdom. Now Zepho thought the time had arrived for him to carry out his plan of vengeance against the posterity of Jacob, all the more as in the meantime Joseph had died, and also his brothers and the valiant men of Pharaoh. He was joined in the enterprise by Hadad, the king of Edom, and by the nations of the east and the Ishmaelites. The allied army was so vast that the space it covered as it stood in rank and file was equal to a 3 days' journey. It formed in battle array in the valley of Pathros, and was met by 300,000 Egyptians and 150 Israelites from Goshen. But the Egyptians did not trust the Israelites. They feared their defection to the sons of Esau and Ishmael. They therefore made an agreement that the Israelites were not to come to the help of the Egyptians until it appeared that the enemy was getting the upper hand. Zepho, who had a high opinion of Balaam's ability, desired him to use his magic arts and find out what would become of the war. But Balaam's knowledge failed him. He could not satisfy the king's wish. The Egyptians got the worst of the first encounter between the two hostile armies, but the aspect of things changed as soon as they summoned the Israelites to aid them. The Israelites prayed to God to support them with his help, and the Lord heard their prayer. Then they threw themselves on Zepho and his allies, and after they had cut down several thousand men, such dismay and confusion took hold of the enemy that they fled hastily, pursued by the Israelites as far as the boundary of the country. The Egyptians, instead of coming to the assistance of the Israelites, had taken to flight, leaving the small band of their allies to dispose of the huge host of their adversaries. Embittered by such treatment, the Israelites slew as many as 200 Egyptians, under the pretext that they thought they belonged to the enemy. The nations at war. Hadad, the king of Edom, who had failed to gain fame and honor in the Egyptian campaign, was favored in fortune in another war, a war against Moab. The Moabites shrank from meeting Hadad alone, and they made an alliance with the Midianites. In the thick of the fight, the Moabites fled from the field of battle, leaving the Midianites to their fate, and these deserted allies of theirs were cut down to a man by Hadad. The Moabites saved their own skins and suffered only the inconvenience of having to pay tribute. To avenge the faithlessness practiced against them, the Midianites, supported by their kinsmen, the sons of Keturah, Hagar, gathered a mighty army and attacked the Moabites the following year. But Hadad came to their assistance, and again he inflicted a severe defeat on the Midianites. That was the beginning of the inveterate hatred between the Moabites and the Midianites. If a single Moabite is caught in the land of Midian, he is killed without mercy, and a Midianite in Moab fares no better. After the death of Hadad, the Edomites installed Samlah of Masrekah as their king, and he reigned 18 years. It was his desire to take up the cause of Agnias, the old ally of the Edomites, and chastise Zepho for having gone to war with them. But his people, the Edomites, would not permit him to undertake anything that was damaging to their kinsmen, and Samlah had to abandon the plan. In the 14th year of Samlah's reign, Zepho died, having been king of Kittim for 50 years. His successor was Jannes, one of the people of Kittim, who enjoyed an equally long reign. Balaam made his escape to Egypt after the death of Zepho, and he was received there with great demonstrations of honor by the king and all the nobles, and Pharaoh appointed him to be royal counselor, for he had heard much about his exceeding great wisdom. In the Edomite kingdom, Samlah was succeeded by Saul of Pethor, a youth of surpassing beauty, whose reign lasted 40 years. His successor on the throne was Baal-Haman, king for 38 years, during which period the Moabites rose up against the Edomites, to whom they had been paying tribute since the time of Hadad, and succeeded in throwing off the yoke of the stranger. The times were troubled everywhere. Agnias, the king of Africa, died, and also the death of Jannes occurred, the king of Kittim. The successors of these two rulers, Asdrubal, the son of Agnias, and Latinus, the king of Kittim, then entered on a long, drawn-out war of many years. At first the fortune of war favored Latinus. He sailed to Africa in ships and inflicted one defeat after another on Asdrubal, and finally this king of Africa lost his life on the battlefield. After destroying the canal from Kittim to Africa, built many years before by Agnias, Latinus returned to his own country, taking with him as his wife Ushpiz-Wanah, the daughter of Asdrubal, who was so wonderfully beautiful that her countrymen wore her likeness on their garments. Latinus did not enjoy the fruits of his victory long. Anibal, the younger brother of Asdrubal and his successor in royal power, went to Kittim in ships and carried on a series of wars lasting 18 years, in the course of which he killed off 80,000 people of Kittim, not sparing the princes and nobles. At the end of this protracted period, he went back to Africa and reigned over his people in quiet and peace. The Edomites, during the 48 years of the reign of Hadad, the successor of Baal-Haman, fared no better than the people of Kittim. Hadad's first undertaking was to defeat the Moabites again and put them under the sovereignty of Edom. But he had to desist because he could not offer successful resistance to a newly chosen king of theirs, one of their own people, who enlisted the aid of their kinsmen, the Ammonites. The allies commanded a great host, and Hadad was overwhelmed. These wars were followed by others between Hadad of Edom and Abimenos of Kittim. The latter was the attacking party, and he invaded Seir with a mighty army. The sons of Seir were defeated abjectly. Their king Hadad was taken captive and then executed by Abimenos, and Seir was made a province subject to Kittim and ruled by a governor. Thus ended the independence of the sons of Esau. Henceforth they had to pay tribute to Kittim, over which Abimenos ruled until his death in the 38th year of his reign. Joseph's magnanimity. As Joseph was returning from the burial of his father in the cave of Machpelah, he passed the pit into which his brothers had once cast him, and looked into it, and said, "Blessed be God who permitted a miracle to come to pass for me here." The brothers inferred from these words of gratitude, which Joseph but uttered in compliance with the injunctions of the law, that he cherished the recollection of the evil they had done him, and they feared that now that their father was dead, their brother would repay them in accordance with their deeds. They observed, moreover, that since their father was no more, Joseph had given up the habit of entertaining them at his table, and they interpreted this as a sign of his hatred towards them. In reality, it was due to Joseph's respect and esteem for his brothers. "So long as my father was alive," Joseph said to himself, "he told me to sit at the head of the table. Yet Judah is king, and Reuben is the firstborn. It was my father's wish, and I complied with it. But now it is not seemly that I should have the first seat in their presence. And yet, being ruler of Egypt, I cannot yield my place to any other." He thought it best, therefore, not to have the company of his brothers at his meals. But they, not understanding his motives, sent Bilhah to him with the dying message of their father, that he was to forgive the transgression and sin of his brothers. For the sake of the ways of peace, they had invented the message. Jacob had said nothing like it. Joseph, on his part, realized that his brothers spoke thus only because they feared he might do harm to them, and he wept that they should put so little trust in his affection. When they appeared and fell down before his face, they said, "You desired to make one of us a slave to yourself. Behold, we are all ready to be your servants." Then he spoke to them gently and tried to convince them that he harbored no evil against them. He said, "Be not afraid. I will do you no harm, for I fear God. And if you think I failed to have you sit at my table because of my enmity towards you, God knows the intention of my heart. He knows that I acted so out of consideration for the respect I owe you. Furthermore," he said, "you are like the dust of the earth, and the sand of the seashore, and the stars in the heavens. Can I do anything to put these out of the world? 10 stars could affect nothing against 1 star, and how much less can 1 star affect anything against 10? Do you believe that I have the power of acting contrary to the laws of nature? 12 hours has the day, 12 hours the night, 12 months the year, 12 constellations are in the heaven, and also there are 12 tribes. You are the trunk, and I am the head. Of what use would be the head without the trunk? It is to my own good that I should treat you with fraternal affection. Before your arrival, I was looked on as a slave in this country. You proved me to be a man of noble birth. Now, if I should kill you, my claims of an aristocratic lineage would be shown to be a lie. The Egyptians would say, 'He was not their brother, they were strangers to him, but he called them his brothers to serve his purpose, and now he has found a pretext to put them out of the way.' Or they would hold me to be a man of no truth, who plays false with his own kith and kin. So how can he keep faith with others? And, in truth, How can I venture to lay hands on those whom my God and my father both have blessed?" As Joseph's dealings were kind and gentle with his brothers, so he was the helper and counselor of the Egyptians. And when Pharaoh departed this life, Joseph being a man of 71 years of age, the king's last wish was that he might be a father to his son and successor Magron, and administer the affairs of state for him. Some of the Egyptians desired to make Joseph king after the death of Pharaoh, but this plan met with opposition on the part of others. They objected to an alien on the throne, and so the royal title was left to Magron, called Pharaoh, according to the established custom, the name given to all Egyptian kings. Joseph was made the actual ruler of the land, but yet he was only viceroy in Egypt. He reigned as king over the lands outside of Egypt, as far as the Euphrates, parts of which Joseph had acquired by conquest. The inhabitants of these countries brought their yearly tribute to him, and other presents besides, and thus did Joseph rule for 40 years, beloved of all, respected by the Egyptians and the other nations. And during all that time his brothers lived in Goshen, happy in the service of God. In his own family circle, Joseph was happy also. He lived to act as godfather at the circumcision of the sons of his grandson, Machir. His end was premature as compared with that of his brothers. At the time of his death he was younger than any of them at their death. It is true, domination buries him that exercises it. He died 10 years before his allotted time, because, without taking umbrage, he had permitted his brothers to call his father his servant in his presence. Asenath. God gives every man the wife he deserves, and so Asenath was worthy of being the helpmate of Joseph, the pious. Her father was Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's nobles, ranking among the most distinguished of them by reason of wisdom, wealth, and station. His daughter was slender like Sarah, beautiful like Rebekah, and radiant in appearance like Rachel. Noblemen and princes sued for her hand when she was 18 years of age. Even Pharaoh's appointed successor, his firstborn son, demanded her in marriage. But his father refused to comply with his wish, because he did not consider her a proper wife for one destined to sit on the throne. The daughter of the Moabite king, he insisted, was a more suitable match. But Asenath rejected every proposal of marriage and avoided all associations with men. With 7 maidens born on the same day as herself, she lived in seclusion, in a magnificent palace adjoining that of her parents. It happened in the first of the 7 years of plenty that Joseph planned to visit the place where Potiphar resided, and he sent word that he would be staying with him at his house. Potiphar was enchanted with this honor, and also with the opportunity it would afford him of bringing about a marriage between Asenath and Joseph. But when he disclosed his plan to his daughter, she rejected it with indignation. "Why should you desire to see me united with a vagabond, a slave?" she cried out. "One that does not even belong to our nation, but is the son of a Canaanite herdsman, a fellow who attempted to violate the honor of his mistress, and in punishment for this crime he was thrown into prison, to be liberated later by Pharaoh for interpreting his dream? No, father, never will I become his wife, but I am willing to marry the son of Pharaoh, the future ruler and king of Egypt." Potiphar promised his daughter not to speak of the plan again. At that moment, Joseph's arrival was announced, and Asenath left the presence of her parents and withdrew herself to her own apartments. Standing by the window, she saw Joseph pass, and she was so transported by his divine beauty and his indescribably noble carriage that she burst into tears and said, "Poor foolish me! What shall I do? I permitted myself to be misled by friends who told me that Joseph was the son of a Canaanite shepherd. Now I behold the splendor that emanates him like the splendor of the sun. In my audacity and folly, I had looked down on him and spoke absurd nonsense against him. I knew not that he was a son of God, as he must be, for among men such beauty as his does not exist. I pray thee, O God of Joseph, grant me pardon. It was my ignorance that made me speak like a fool." If my father will give me in marriage to Joseph, I will be his forever." Meanwhile, Joseph had taken his seat at Potiphar's table, and he observed a maiden looking at him from one of the palace windows. He commanded that she be ordered away, for he never permitted women to gaze at him or come near him. His supernatural beauty always fascinated the noble Egyptian ladies, and they were untiring in the efforts they made to approach him. But their attempts were in vain. He cherished the words of his father Jacob, who had admonished his son to keep aloof from the women of the Gentiles. Potiphar explained to Joseph that the maiden at the window was his virgin daughter, who never permitted men near her. He was the first man she had ever looked on. The father continued and made the request of Joseph to allow his daughter to pay him her respects. Joseph granted the favor he desired, and Asenath appeared and greeted him with the words, "Peace be with you, you blessed of the Most High." Joseph returned the salutation, "Blessed be you of the Lord, from whom flow all blessings." Asenath desired to kiss Joseph, but he warded off the intimate greeting with the words, "It is not correct that a God-fearing man, who blesses the living God, and eats the blessed bread of life, who drinks of the blessed cup of immortality and incorruptibility, and anoints himself with the fragrant oil of holiness, should kiss a woman of a strange people, who blesses dead and unprofitable idols, and eats the putrid bread of idolatry, which chokes the soul of man, who drinks the libations of deceit, and anoints herself with the oil of destruction." These words uttered by Joseph touched Asenath, causing her to weep. Out of compassion, Joseph bestowed his blessing on her, calling on God to pour out his Spirit over her and make her a member of his people and his inheritance, and grant her a portion in the eternal life. Next, the marriage of Joseph. End part 33 of 95, TheLegendsOfTheJews.com.